Hello and welcome to episode 317 of the Crate and Crowbar. It is the 1st of April 2020, the Day of Lies, and joining me in our second attempt at an internet room is Dr. Bingo Clang.
Hello!
Ran from an egg.
Hello!
And a very special appearance from Guest CT.
Hello.
Confusingly, not me, the person whose initials are CT, but in fact Tom Senior.
Why has it done this? Why has the software done this?
Well, why didn't you put your name in? Why didn't you put your real name in?
I don't know how to do that, Alex. I'm not tech savvy.
We are using a piece of software called Cast, which is very good. It's a bad name because it's extremely hard to Google, but this was actually suggested to us by a Discord user, Shugothic, who has maybe saved the podcast. This has solved a lot of the problems we had at Remote Pods, so thank you for that. More importantly, it's allowed people to set their own nicknames, which is why the roster has changed quite so dramatically in such a short space of time.
Nicknames? What are you talking about?
Sorry, it's allowed people to finally, as so many things have in this scenario that we're living through, to allow people to shed their external husks to reveal...
and the accredited doctor.
Exactly. There is their medical license.
The butterfly within Marsh.
And also, yeah, or just the default name awaiting inside. And also, as a note on top of the podcast, Tom, I'm aware that you have a gas situation.
So, to explain, if I disappear or die in an explosion during the course of this podcast, it's because there is quite a gas leak in the basement of the building we're living in. So, that's a fun little kind of frisson, I think, for this podcast.
You've done something about this presumably before recording a podcast.
Yeah. I don't actually want to die, so we invited.
If there is an explosion, do we have your blessing to continue?
Yeah, absolutely. You should not even break stride. Just carry on. Forge ahead with the podcast.
The pod goes on.
The show must go on.
Yeah, good. Wow, what an era we're living in. Thank you for joining us in this unprecedented pod situation for so many different reasons. Tom, would you like to I should say, Guest CT, would you like to tell us about what you've been doing in your life and flat and computer games recently?
So I've gone all in on virtual reality, and
not a bad idea.
Yes, and as escapism goes, it's about as intense as that gets, really, I suppose. I'll confess, I know we talk about PC games here, but it's all been on PlayStation VR because it's frankly the most affordable option when it comes to actually getting into new VR games. But I've had a really good time with some of these VR games, and I've particularly enjoyed The Room VR, which came out just a few days ago. And there's a particular novelty to very simple interactions in VR that remind me of the opening of Half-Life 2 when you throw a can at a guard's head.
Yeah.
And that felt incredible at the time. It's whoa, I can't believe that, these items just reacted as they might do in real life. And that kind of enthusiasm, has now been translated in The Room VR for me to, the action of, operating a pulley system. And so what you do, because obviously you've got your controllers and the triggers, and the triggers grab things, but you actually get to do. I looked fucking stupid doing this, but you get to sort of grab the pulley, and then just pull it down with your right hand, take over from your left hand, and actually do that kind of hand over hand gesture to actually very, very slowly make a very convoluted contraption, pick the lid off a sarcophagus. And this is the height of VR for me. To be honest, this is the best time I've had in VR, just doing that stuff. Just the most basic interactions, just very simple things that feel really, really nice.
That series is very much about fiddling, though. It's a good fiddling game series, isn't it?
definitely. And it's all about poking things, and it's kind of, it's absurd, and I think it has some problems in that it doesn't flag very well what you can or can't interact with. And there are like lots of drawers and things around, and about half of them you can open and pull and touch, but a bunch of them just don't react or respond. And the only sort of clue you get as to whether you can actually grab something is that your fake VR hands just open in a sort of grasping gesture, like it really wants to do something to this thing. And you just have to sort of follow that weird language. But that I think the trouble with VR in that context is that because just the act of like moving beautiful puzzle boxes around should just be so natural, having to negotiate this strange visual language really kind of, I think, just distances you from the beautiful puzzle boxes they've created. But having said that, I'm still really enjoying it, and as I said before, like the novelty of those basic interactions feels amazing.
Mm-hmm. So the Room, because you played a bunch of the Room games in the past, I believe, is that right?
Yeah, I played all of them. I actually love the Room series. They're great.
So these are the sort of mystery box kind of puzzle.
Yeah,
toys.
So they're kind of
metaphysical twist.
Yeah, they're kind of impossible, beautiful machines that you unlock gradually, and also there's an underlying occult theme, and it's genuinely quite sinister sometimes, and that's a kind of cool bit of background noise to enjoy as you're just solving puzzles and stuff.
Have you done any VR incantations?
Not yet, but that's a great idea. That'd be good. There's
cultist VR, that would be good.
In Bloodborne, there are certain sort of gestures and ways that you can make your character just sort of perform a gesture, and one of them is sort of, I think it's called like contact or make contact, and it's a very strange kind of like the guy reaches his hands up in the air and then slowly moves them around. But there's one particular point in the entire game where you contact the Elder Gods by doing that, and that's fucking cool. And that should probably be in VR because you can actually do those motions if you want to.
Yeah, you could follow the instructions and then perform it.
Yeah, you could actually summon Cthulhu and regret it immediately.
That's a good idea, because there is something quite meditative about VR. It's actually better for those kinds of experiences than a lot of other things, right? Like sitting on the floor of your living room, but you're somewhere else.
And then for going through an adventure in which you find a book and you open the book, and then there's this very detailed sequence of movements you have to perform, and then you do it. That's going to feel really personal.
Yeah. There was a Kinect Harry Potter game, if you recall that, in which you had to do the gestures for different spells. It didn't work, but also it was a terrible game. It was like a cover shooter, weirdly. And the spell you used to defeat things was always the stupefy spell. So every time you fired, basically your gun wand, Harry Potter would shout, "Stupefy, stupefy, stupefy," just continuously, and it did. It really did.
Yeah, that was from the era where everything was a cover shooter, though, right? Like it was that.
Yeah, they called
it Gears.
Yeah. Gears of Wand is what it was nicknamed. Yeah. Anyway, that's. I'm sure that the Room is a lot better than that. A room game with real sophistication.
Did you see the video that went around today of someone juggling in Half-Life Alyx?
Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you said that VR is so good at bringing back that feeling of like the opening of Half-Life 2 and interacting with that physics for the first time, it was almost like, man, wouldn't it be amazing if there was a game that combined those two exact things that we could talk about? But no, because none of us have a Valve Index or Vive or Indeed, one of those.
Indeed so not. Have you been following the storyline at all in the Room, Tom? Because I've played most of the Rooms, I think, apart from the ones which were iPhone or Apple device exclusive at the time when I didn't have an Apple device, and I found it very hard to work out what the overall sort of overarching story is.
I agree, and I'm completely lost as well. There's sort of a lot of generic mysterious threat and people who have investigated occult mysteries and gone too far, but I can't remember any of the names of the people who actually did any of that stuff. But it's weird in the Room VR. There are like leaflets everywhere with handwritten descriptions of a character who is also going too far into the mystery, but brilliantly. You can just read it and not understand it, but then you can lift it up in front of your face and activate a special vision mode, and there's a fiery hole in it, and you can point that at a mysterious floating symbol in the room, and you'll see a ghost.
Oh wow!
And that's a very good VR interaction. That was very good. But yes, it's nonsense basically. But I think overall, I enjoy the kind of I hate the word vibe, but you know what I mean. The sort of tone of it, the feeling of slight menace and discomfort there. That's just under the surface,
and
that's
all the
really
well-polished metalwork and tables.
Absolutely, I'd want to make one of those devices. I think if I ever get to retire and grow old, I will just make strange puzzle boxes like the room did in real life.
There's a weird sort of disconnect between the kind of fictional framing of it, which seems to be that somebody's left you all these puzzle boxes, possibly with bad intent, like it's going to trap you forever in some sort of metaphysical fucking other world. But then at the same time, the exact same set of puzzles have been crafted for you by a very nice group of developers. And there's just something strange about this. I don't know.
And also, like, they're so much fun to interact with. And then at the end of like finishing a puzzle, often just a load of tentacles come out and just digest all of the the puzzle box that you've just solved. And at that point, you'd be like, "Fuck this!" Surely, like let's perhaps not continue with this adventure. But
it is fun.
It is fun nonetheless. Yeah, for sure. The tentacles are awful. They're pretty sinister in VR as well. It's very, very good.
Good. What are you planning to move on to anything else VR wise, or is it sort of one thing at a time?
Oh, I've been playing loads of stuff on PlayStation VR. There's a sort of James Bond game I'm playing that is really, really fun and stupid, which isn't on PC actually. I think it's called Blood and Fury or something.
Yeah,
Blood
and Truth. Blood and...
Yeah. Yeah, I should probably look these things up before
Hang on,
I talk about them on the podcast.
I'm actually at my computer right now. I just remembered. I'll tell you what, you keep talking.
I think Blood and Truth is right, actually.
I think it is. I hope people at home forgive my mechanical keyboard.
It's clunky.
So
he's typing.
That sounds so good to press those buttons.
Blood and Truth is correct.
Yeah, that's the one.
10 points to run from an egg.
It's a very, very British action film game with people with London accents going Tango 6-6 and stuff like that a lot.
And Tango 6-6. He's hit me in the apples and stairs. All that.
But it's good. I've not actually played Half-Life Alyx.
Born in Suffolk, Alex Wiltshire.
I've not played Half-Life Alyx, but one of the kind of things that really appealed to me about that game is the way that you actually, a bit like Receiver, the way you actually operate your gun, and the way that magazines fall out of it and you have to actually kind of cock it properly and stuff. And there's an element of that in Blood and Truth, but it's sort of, the game tries to guess where your hands are all the time. So if you've got a pistol in your right hand and you sort of move your left hand close to it, in the game the two hands will clasp together and form that Jason Bourne, James Bond kind of shooting poise. And again, it's a constant theme with VR of looking like an absolute twat while you're doing this, even though you feel like you're fucking awesome, badass kind of action hero guy. So I was like edging around corners with my clasped hands with a pistol and just like aiming down the sights and just kind of checking all the corners. And then my girlfriend was sitting there for like 10 minutes and I did not know she was there, and then afterwards she just like looked at me and just shook her head.
Did you say girlfriend, not fiance there for a reason, Tom?
Yeah. Oh no, yeah. still fiance, thankfully. Still fiance. But there was that moment of regard for just like, what are you doing? What are you really doing here? Which is always going to be part of VR, but I really got into it and actually really enjoyed it so far.
Have you played Astrobot on PlayStation VR?
Yes, so that's I think that was produced in-house by Sony, I think, as part of something that was actually designed to sell PSVR as a concept. And that actually, I've enjoyed that a lot because to explain it, it's a third-person platformer basically, where you're looking down on your little robot in your VR 3D world. But a lot of the puzzles force you to look around corners to actually continue the platforming and actually find the platforms, which is a cool use of that. I think there's another game similar which has a mouse in it.
Yeah, the Mint.
Murgatroyd?
I know exactly what I've played the one you're talking about.
Moss.
I was going to say Miriam Margulies, but no, it's Moss.
Yeah, and it's it has this kind of pastoral charm to it, though I don't think it's actually a very good platformer. And I feel like the bespoke Sony created stuff is actually uses the medium in interesting ways rather than just being a basic 3D platformer.
Yeah.
It feels like there has to be an extra reason in VR to actually make it feel special.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, so does this have you tempted by any of the PC VR kind of things?
The
Do you
trouble
think
is
it's becoming part of your gaming life, like even in these extraordinary circumstances?
It is, yeah. Like I really like VR actually. I've actually been watching loads of 3D films in VR. I actually watched Avatar and didn't hate it.
What?
You watched
I know.
What?
Because I watched it in the cinema and I hated it because it's rubbish. But watching it in VR, just the sheer spectacle of and the 3D effects and how kind of.
Oh, so what do you get from it in VR?
You're actually there in the film.
Wow, that's cool.
You're there with this mighty whitey guy who discovers a new culture and then becomes better at the culture than they are. Which is it's horrible. It's a terrible film in that respect. It is bad. Don't get me wrong, and I'm not not endorsing it. But I think actually having a headset on, though it can be uncomfortable, for me the 3D effect is much more pronounced than it is in 3D cinema or anything like that. So actually seeing them leap off a cliff and then strangle a dragon, which is a thing that happens in that film, looks great, and it's like, whoa, this is amazing. And likewise, I've just gone through loads of 3D films like Gravity, that actually really thought about how to make 3D work in a cinematic context, and that's kind of special actually. It's really good. I've been really impressed, even if the films themselves have been deeply culturally insensitive.
I bought Disney Plus, and it was the fact that Avatar was suggested on the first page of suggestions amongst that raft of stuff was come on, stop trying to make this happen, please. But
much more of it is happening, Chris. Apparently, God knows how many films are actually coming.
But this is the thing, right? Because if things are going to get real weird in 6 months when there are no new films or TV shows, right? Because none of them will have been made. So surely Avatar wouldn't be the thing that survives that. But maybe it is.
I think that might be a terrible future.
Yeah, I'll know.
Honestly.
Chilling. You mentioned earlier games where people from London take tango a lot and then give each other significant but entirely platonic glances. Dr. Bingo Clang.
Yes.
Would you like to discuss
the cadaver on this table?
Well, actually, I mean, we've already talked about it on the podcast before. Tom was already given his eloquent take on the latest Call of Duty single player extravaganza. But then last week, you said you had played it as well.
Yes.
And then I felt I needed to find reason to hoof it right in the balls as well. So I played it. I paid 50 whole pounds of money to Bobby Kotick to experience a game which I'm largely disgusted by.
So this is, I want to put a little caveat in front of my own thing, because I said in the podcast break last week that I have not been more disgusted by a piece of entertainment for ever, I don't think.
Oh no!
At least-
I mean, surely other preceding Call of Duties must have.
Yeah.
I
must have
no, I
been-
don't. I think if that's what fascinated me about it. Like, this game really felt like they leveled up their ability to do tasteless things.
They certainly are trying very hard to push the envelope in certain sequences.
So yeah, I'm interested that you made it, because I bought it not for £50. I think I managed to get away with 30, partly because I was really enjoying Call of Duty Warzone. Really like it, actually.
Warzone?
Yeah, Warzone. They are spicy and delicious, and I like it a lot, actually. And it got me wanting to play COD multiplayer, and I bought it for that purpose, and really like the multiplayer. And there's this whole game there, which makes a ton of sense, really, in terms of it being a known thing. And you can even download these bizarre 90s style theme DLC packs so that you can give your favourite operator a surf bum themed gun skin or something. And there's all this shit, and it would be perfectly fine as this multiplayer game, already extensive enough as it is. And then, but bolted to it is like genuinely one of the most technically impressive and least appealing bits of mass market entertainment I think I've ever become aware of. And I'm fascinated by that, by that dichotomy, because it's not that it's bad or that it's undercooked. It's that it's like a series of really intentional and I think appalling decisions.
Can we? Sorry to interrupt, Chris. I wondered if we could talk about the long sequence where you're a child with a screwdriver who has to
Fucking hell.
kneecap people.
I thought that was one of my highlights of the game. Actually, I mean, both mechanically, I thought that was a far more interesting thing than nearly any of the other just plain COD shooting sequences. But also, no, okay, it was deeply offensive, I suppose.
Jesus Christ! Like, there's. I have to admit, I played it 2 weeks ago, so maybe it's fresher for you. But I went through the whole thing in this state of kind of astonished, disgust. Partly because of how one thing about it, I think the reason it surprised me. Previous CODs have done, questionable things, but the fidelity has not ever been 100% there. And in some cases, the fact that it will wrest control away from you to force something, I think it doesn't excuse what's going on in the game, but it somehow takes you out of it sufficiently. Whereas, one thing I want to I was genuinely incredibly impressed with how finely woven into the experience all of its kind of scripted sequences and light choice moments are. I just wish they were there for a purpose that wasn't really shocking in its tastelessness. I don't know, maybe I'm over-egging it, or Tom, I'd be interested if you had the same read. I'm thinking specifically of things like the very early level with a terrorist attack in London, which is both wildly unbelievable and then full of these tiny moments of people begging for their lives and being gunned down in the street that are close enough to feeling real that it seems deeply inappropriate.
Is it doing the thing where it's putting you on the side that's doing the gunning down? What's the
No.
What's the
So
framing?
I mean, yeah, maybe to step this back and unpack it a little bit. So that sequence, you are a member of the SAS or something, but you're there trailing a van that you think's got terrorists in it, and then suddenly bomb goes off, everyone's screaming and dying, and you're chasing people through the streets, and you're in Piccadilly Circus, and there's and suddenly there are van loads of men with guns coming from different directions, and the Metropolitan Police are there dressed as they normally would be, but they're somehow extremely heavily armed, which they wouldn't be. But you'll hear something but it's full of it's an FPS level, but it's full of these weird little kind of semi-organic moments where someone will say over the radio you hear there's hostages in the subway or on the tube, and you go, if you know where the tube station is, you go down there, and then you'll maybe shoot one guy and you'll see 2 civilians get executed while screaming and begging for their lives, and then a cop will appear and shoot the other one, and these are little stage moments that sort of are woven in and out of regular play. And then there are levels that are built entirely around that concept, where you're clearing buildings full of potential terrorists in the dark, which are horrible. You're never put in the no Russian, you do the gunning down situation, but you're forced to kind of confront it constantly.
I found that those sequences were the most effective. Sounds like it's a compliment. But what I mean by that is that in terms of what the game's trying to achieve, those house clearance sequences are very incredibly well produced and executed in terms of the feeling that it wants to give you. However, it is awful because it's so realistic and it's so close to how those messy kind of special forces raids happen, that actually it's kind of stomach churning in a way.
And the stomach churningness is coming from the fact that it's still a gleeful shoot gun man game.
No, so I don't think it's actually, those sequences aren't gleeful. They're just kind of awful. It's just so you'll burst into a room and then there'll be a woman and she'll be scrambling desperately for a gun or something just to defend herself, and then you shoot her. And I don't know, it's just a cold, horrible fantasy to actually realise with so much fidelity.
How did you find it, Marsh?
Well, I agree. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a weird sort of ping-ponging back and forth between being what is an incredibly brainless piece of mass-market entertainment and also trying to approach subject matter that would be in any circumstances incredibly challenging. And, they want to appear to be gritty and provocative and say, war, it's always dirty and you don't come out clean and we've got to be
Sometimes it takes a bad man to take down the bigger, badder man.
Exactly. Whilst, making slightly homoerotic eyes at his underling.
Yeah.
And but it doesn't have anything to say about these things except, but they're completely necessary. And
thank God for that.
and it just leaves it at that, and that's not good enough. It just absolves itself of any kind of responsibility to say that these things are bad because it makes everybody do them. And every part, it's everybody involved, every character in that game at some point tortures another person horrendously, or you are tortured yourself. And and also, I mean, sure, there are really bad people in the world, and I'm sure some of them are Russians. But it seems a little bit glib that it makes its arch enemy not only just this horrendous mass murderer, but also implied a paedophile as well. Just oh, come on.
Well, I was going to I think the thing that shocked me most about it, because one thing that's weird about it is it's almost this game was made by a million different studios, and you don't know who's responsible for what. And there are definitely sections where it feels like it goes from I think, I don't know, I'm saying this for sure, but it feels like one studio was given charge of war crimes. Can you just make sure this has a certain amount of, convention-breaking acts of state terror in it, and this other company will go away and make levels where you fight a big juggernaut man by doing steam valves in his face. And because you have both of those things. But the thing that really struck me about it was, I think if it was just the kind, obviously there's tons of modern military games that step wrong in all of these sorts of ways, Clancy stuff, etc. But the thing that I think made me kind of really sort of alarmed by this is I think there was a concerted attempt to be responsible in certain ways, but it's gone all the way around to just full on cowardice. There's a really ham-fisted moment early on where it says, this organization, they're not terrorists, they're actually criminals. They're criminal anarchists, and they're trying to blow stuff up because they hate the free market, but not in a religious or ideological way, just because they're bad. But however, they are all Middle Eastern, and they are going to belong to an organization with an Arabic name whose acronym is AQ. So you're not going to be left with a long list of things that might be an analogy for, but all we've done is try and give us an exemption from the really stickiest, nastiest aspect of this, which is either the racist element or the religious element. And similarly, your big baddie is a Russian general who lives in a mansion and all the rest of this stuff, and who is dangerously playing the international game of biological weapon terror. But don't worry, he's not actually sanctioned by the Russian government, and they would like him gone just as much as as you know, as you do. And, you know, we're going to try and address this series' long-standing issue of how it presents people from the Middle East and Asia by having two of the principal characters be young people, young freedom fighters who definitely aren't from Afghanistan. They're definitely not from Afghanistan. We're going to call the country something else. It's definitely not Afghanistan. It was invaded first by the Russians and then by the Americans, but it's not. Shut up. It's not Afghanistan. And you're definitely not going to like that whole sequence where you're a 7-year-old not Afghan girl crawling around on the kitchen floor trying to stab a Spetsnaz man to death with some scissors. is kind of extraordinary, but it's like, and then it all culminates in this moment where it forms like the war crime Avengers, where they're all like, you know, it's like, where they're like the frazzled CIA woman who's like, how are we going to do enough war crimes to get out of this one? Who are we going to call? And it's like, it's these guys. And it does this like panning shot of them all like, yeah, we're in it together. And it's the young black Londoner and the older SAS dude who you remember from the other games. And two definitely not Afghan freedom fighters. Or maybe at a push they might be Kurds, like, but they're definitely, you know,
But what, I mean, so this, I mean, you just hit upon something which I find exasperatingly stupid about the entire setup, which is, I mean, okay, so they have this pretense that they're going to approach this mature subject matter, but then their solution is fucking, you know, Khaki Avengers, basically, which makes no sense. Who is Captain Price? I mean, is he there's nobody who seems to be in command of him. He just seems to go anywhere and make deals with the CIA as he pleases. Is he the UK's envoy to Langley? This fucking mustachioed, it's exasperating. But I would challenge you on the idea that this is the most offensive Call of Duty game. I think this is maybe third. It could be second, actually. But Black Ops 2 was definitely, like, way worse.
Really?
because it had actual kind of historical revisionism in it. Whereas this game is always, is, you know, future looking, even if it is absolutely abhorrent in most ways. But at least the places it describes are fictionalized. You know, okay, so it kind of relocates the Highway of Death, an American war crime, to being a Russian war crime in a fictional country.
Exactly.
But it doesn't excuse, for example, the CIA's support of Nicaraguan death squads, which Black Ops 2 absolutely does. Like, there's a character in it who says, oh yeah, that was just an accident. He actually uses the word accident. Death toll 30,000. You know, and, you know, we don't target civilians, says one character in the CIA's defense. And it's just like, just nonsense, isn't it? I mean, they do.
Maybe you're right. Like, I think I was just for some reason there was a disconnect in my brain between the openly tasteless, stupid things that happened in the noughties, and early teens, and a game now, you know, like, it's because they've made half this effort, I think, through the like, their fictionalization, which they must think is subtle, but it's not, because as you say, they just transplant real things and again, revise them.
At least they didn't get, what's his name? The Oliver North, to come out and PR the game for them. A guy who's literally convicted of felony thanks to his involvement in the Iran Contra thing. You know?
Like, yeah, man, I think the other thing is, like, it lands on this point, which is that, like, there is no state actor involved here it's responsible. Like, war is just like a couple of bad apples versus a couple of good apples. And, you know, like,
everybody's bad. All these apples are dirty, Chris. You can't have a clean apple without making other apples dirty. Can you?
Not if you're cleaning your apples with some other apples. No.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Now nosh me off. That's the subtext in every conversation that Captain Price has.
He's got very kind eyes, and he's a murderer.
Limpid eyes. Yeah. He's got a wonderful moustache as well. I have to say, like, there are, I mean, the game is bad, as a game, I think, also. But it is genuinely spectacular, and it's a shame that so many incredibly talented technical artists have been put to work on something which is, you know, almost almost kind of culturally meritless.
Yeah, well, that's what's
It's
surprising.
all
It's
the
like,
way.
yeah, it's so impressive, and like, it feels like it just, and also I think interesting as a milestone because I just can't see it existing in any other medium. Like, I feel like games are the only medium capable of this. Like,
Gerard Butler's given it a good old jolly try.
yeah, I guess he has, but like, I don't know. They don't do Happy Meal toys for Zero Dark 30. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there's some.
It is the added level of realism to this, the kind of the ricochet between super gritty dark material and just, complete and utter brain full of farts nonsense. That's the real thing. I think even the dumbest Gerard Butler films, they are dumb throughout. Like, it's stupid, like the word Brighton and the stick of rock, whereas this has just such a kind of veneer of realism to it. I mean, that's part of what is so kind of fetishistic about it, right? All the guns, and they all have the right clips and the bits and the widgets and the doodads. And his moustache and the way his eyes crease, because the rigging on the faces is so compelling. And, and
and the moments where it's like attempting, because the performances are genuinely good as well. Like, I think the actors did a good job both with the performance capture and with the voice acting generally. Like, that's what's, I think, the striking lack of like calorific value to like anything in it. Like, they allow a Russian man into the Khaki Avengers right at the end, I think, just simply for balance's sake, to have completed the set. And like, it's like, so you can see it really transparently, the whiteboard, where it's like, we do want to have there be a good guy or a good girl or, from every faction that we're representing to show that we're being balanced and that really it's just a couple of bad apples responsible for all this war crime. So what are we going to do for the Russian character? Well, he's going to be called Nikolai. He's going to wear a tracksuit and he's going to drive a transit van into a war zone to deliver you some bombs you need.
That's all of the Russians pretty much represented right there.
Yeah, it's like,
but you have, in the same game, you have an entire level where you sit on top of a building with a sniper rifle and Russians park up and run quite slowly towards you without taking cover, and you kill hundreds of them. And I don't know how you really square those two things.
No, and literally you can press escape, and you should, and go back to the main menu, and then you can play another game where a skull face man kicks you out of a plane so that you can wrestle people for, SMG clips. Like, or another mode where you can press 4 to momentarily be a cruise missile.
I like that mode.
Yeah,
I mean, I didn't come to this expecting very much because I'd already been fully primed basically by you guys. But what was surprising to me is how weak I thought all the shooting was in it. Not the actual kind of the sensation of bullets leaving your digital gun, which is of course expertly modelled, but just the combat scenarios and the way it's executed are garbage. Like, these games have always had a problem articulating gun battles because they're generally just corridors basically, and you proceed along them, then a checkpoint happens, and then more enemies come towards you, and you can push forward and hit another checkpoint. And that system has become increasingly difficult to manage with larger arenas, basically, because it's not clear where you put the triggers for the next sequence to kick in. And the result of this has been that it's really easy to break these games if you don't do exactly the prescribed thing. And that seems to have just got more and more true. And it's incredibly true in this, where you, like, none of your allies or your enemies seem to be doing anything that makes any sense at any point. You'll run forward, and then there'll be kind of like enemies who've somehow got behind you and are now shooting over your shoulder at their kind of in the direction of their colleagues. And then your allies will have somehow leapfrogged the enemy and are kind of milling about in the far distance. Everybody just seems to be everywhere. There doesn't seem to be any kind of line of battle. And so it's incredibly difficult for you to work out where you're meant to be. And loads of the time, you just end up kind of running in the wrong direction and getting kind of jam-faced and then dead in very quick succession. And and it's just like a trial and error. Like, oh, okay, I wasn't meant to go over there. Maybe I can go over to this bit. And you're like, oh no, that's an invisible wall. I'm dead now. And then you go over there, and then suddenly, this is where I need to stand for the helicopter to explode. And you're like, oh, it's held together with the most kind of flimsy material, even though it looks so substantial when you're doing the right thing. It's just so brittle, so easy to break. You push on any direction other than the intended one, and the entire thing snaps.
I think the way that shooters have matured in the last 10 years actually pushes you into sandbox arenas. So if we're thinking about stuff like Doom 2016 and Eternal, Wolfenstein, a lot of the just really good modern shooters, they actually are, they throw you into a kind of space with a bunch of enemies that aren't fucking idiots that can actually move around and try and kill you. Whereas Call of Duty's approach is almost like a kind of ghost train type thing, where you go forwards into a street, and then all the enemies run out the assigned piece of cover, and then when you shoot them, another identical enemy runs out their assigned piece of cover, and it's almost like the facade doesn't hold up anymore, because other shooters are just so much better, and Destiny as well is just like another great sandbox shooter, where the enemies are dumb and they're there to be destroyed, but they aren't. There isn't that kind of like, this sounds weird, but a lack of respect for the player.
Yeah.
In Call of Duty, whereas it's here's a shooting gallery, but it doesn't present itself as a shooting gallery. It presents itself as some sort of Tom Clancy action movie, and those two aspects of the Call of Duty franchise have never met up, I don't think.
And I think, like, it wouldn't be fine, but it would be like, you can accept it as a kind of a passing thrill just to get to the next scripted thing. If what it was going for creatively wasn't so strange and off-putting. Like, I suspect that the people who don't give a shit about whether or not it's horrendous, who aren't offended by it and don't care, would be equally happy with a lighter take on this idea, right? Like the Bad Company thing, which was done successfully, where it's a big old violent episode of the A-Team, to make it more James Bondy or more obviously heightened rather than this kind of gritty thing. But there's this strange desire to deliver this really kind of like cheap thrills entertainment while trying to get you to believe that this is profound. Like, I not to keep moaning, but holy shit, the audacity of the quotes that appear when you die is extraordinary.
So what genre have they gone into? Because they must have done all the quotes by now. Yeah.
All of them. So it's either going to be like a quote from a Churchill or something, like, big book of war quotes, or it'll be Gandhi, or, and this is the thing that really gets me, it'll be a character from the game. So it'll be like, you're either going to get, like, sometimes you'll get this quote which is like,
Nosh me off, Gary.
Yeah, exactly that. It's some platitudinous thing like,
I think he was actually quoting
if we wish
Voltaire
to be free, we must do a crime.
I'd say replace all those. Someone should mod in just Terry Pratchett quotes in the place of every single one of those.
Yeah. Well, I don't normally get hyper negative about something, but given how much I enjoy the multiplayer, like, I had a great time with Warzone, and with regular COD multiplayer, because it's a lot of fun. It's good. Run around, get shot in the back. Next time, it is you who shoots someone in the back. Cycle of life continues.
I think one of the most fun I've had as a news writer has been mocking Call of Duty over the many years I've been doing this. I think my favourite one, this is really unfair to do, but I put a George Orwell quote about being shot in the neck by a sniper next to a description of what it is like to actually die in Call of Duty, and it just kind of exposed, like, because Call of Duty has that potential, it wants to have those George Orwell quotes in there, it wants to kind of seem like it's profound or deep in that way, but there's so much absurdity in the combat itself. Like, it's not even lethal, it's not even very lethal combat. It's not like Red Orchestra, where that's for me like a much more realistic depiction of a close quarters conflict than Call of Duty is. But it still wants to try and pretend that it is that.
Yeah, I think it's just sort of striking, like, how unnecessary it feels to me that they make this way. But I guess,
well, maybe they won't now that they've got the big cash cow of what's on, eh? Maybe they'll just stick with that forever and spare us the single player games. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it has a post-credit sequence which does heavily imply the expansion of the War Crimes Avengers.
Yeah.
The pleased with themselvesness where, like, Captain Price goes for coffee with the frazzled CIA woman, minor spoilers, and he kind of, his eyes sort of go soft and he gets a big load of folders out, and it's all the characters from the old Modern Warfare games that you remember, Jerry Snipes.
What's weird about that sequence is
Dr.
that
Bomb.
So he's like, I've got to put a team together. And the CIA lady is like, no, I'm not going to allow that. And he basically says, well, okay, I'm off. And she's like, okay then. And then she hands him a folder. And then he opens the folder. And then he explains who the people are in it to her. It's like, but how did she have the folder with the team that he said he wanted to make? And then how did she not know who anybody in it was? I don't understand.
There's nothing, and the thing is, you don't actually see what's in the folder. So I like to believe that there's nothing in those folders. That it's just like this active role play. Like, it's like I need to pretend to be giving you this folder, or I can't say Simon.
There's also a good cinematic sequence just as they're introducing the final mission. Obviously, you've got the Khaki Avengers together at that point, and it's like one of these kind of like the planning phase where it scans over some maps, and then there's like a diagram with pinpoints in it to show kind of exit and entrances, and there's the bomb that they're going to use, and then there's it passes over a photograph of all of them standing beside each other. You're like, did they take a picture of themselves and then pin it to their own plan board?
Yeah, exactly. Friends.
Yeah.
Squad. Like, and it's also the whole thing which is like, this mission must be done off the books. Who could possibly do it? I guess it's just these bastards. And if only we had some kind of independent-ish militia we could helicopter in from a different war-torn country to do this unaccountably. None of, the UK or America definitely couldn't be implicated in this. Anyway, do use a flare marker to call in a drone strike. An independent drone strike, presumably.
Yeah, freelance drone strikes. Obviously, the fuel of Call of Duty plots.
Maybe it's all just Price's fantasy. That's what you're playing. Like he's actually just this very lonely man. It's
an extremely intense weekend away with the TA.
Yeah.
He's sort of.
Well, there is a moment in one. I can't remember which Call of Duty it is. It's the one set in the future where lots of people are cyborgs and they get a cyborg disease and they all go mad. Do you remember which one that was? And it's got
Infinite Warfare.
Yeah, it sounds like Infinite Warfare.
Yeah, could be. It's got Starbuck in it. The lady who plays Starbuck. I forget her name. Yes. Anyway, spoilers. She dies, and she's a cyborg, and you go into her brain, and then it's a World War II battle, and it sort of implies that all of Call of Duty have been the misfiring, dying neurons of a cyborg brain. Which I think would have been a good note on which to end the series. But somehow it has persisted. Money, I guess.
Switch me off, Jerry. Sorry for leading this half-hour exorcism of that fucking game, but Warzone's very good. I like it a lot. Yeah. You can drive a big truck, handles badly, kill man real good. Beep beep.
Beep beep.
Alex, what you been doing with your time and life?
I've been sort of trying to escape, really. I found I got Animal Crossing last week, and I've played barely any of it because my daughter and my wife have been playing it instead, and that's been really nice to see, really lovely to see. They're like properly, like my wife and I played on GameCube years and years ago, so it's nice to see her returning to the series. But what's that's actually boiled down to is evenings in which my wife plays Animal Crossing and I play Red Dead Redemption, and she's hunting bugs and I'm hunting mammals, and it's really nice. It's the similarities, or at least what you can construct from Red Dead Redemption is actually quite close in bucolic sort of escapism as what Animal Crossing is designed to create, and that's been really nice to kind of rediscover, because I really like. We've all played Red Dead Redemption, haven't we? We all have not. You haven't played it. So yeah, like I've kind of struggled with it. I got it at release and I played it a bit, and I've kind of, it's very big and it's beautiful and things, but it's very big and I got a bit lost in it. But like returning to it over the last couple of weeks, just getting to just canter about on my horse, I've been devoting myself pretty much to hunting, which sounds bad because hunting's bad, right? But I'm an ethical hunter. I've decided I only go for the perfect pelts. So I kind of
I only kill beautiful things.
Exactly. And I always choose the right gun so as to preserve the perfect pelt. But it also means that it's just one shot to kill them, as long as I aim it right, and that's humane, right? Pretty sure.
Yeah, it's what the bear would have wanted.
But yeah, it just the quiet of just going through a forest and creeping around and looking for tracks and finding new birds to spot for my, for the compendium thing, and just adding to that and finding rabbits and making hats out of rabbits and making hats out of skunks. It's just, I don't know, it's been exactly what I wanted because I've not been able to play Animal Crossing. Did you get into the hunting much, Matt?
No, I didn't. I didn't do it in order to make stuff. I did it quite a bit in order to feed the camp.
Right.
But I didn't want to. I didn't want to make trinkets out of these noble beasts.
It's funny, isn't it? Like there are so many facets to the game that you, like I didn't even know. Like I suppose it makes sense that you can feed the camp. It's never occurred to me that I would take food back to the camp.
Oh wow! You see, I was obsessed with that. I thought that was one thing I had to do.
Yeah. I think
Okay,
this is just one of the games where, like, anything you choose to do and get into, like, it just feels that this is the game that was designed to do that, because it's also it manages to make pretty much everything you do feel meaningful, doesn't it? Like there is a sort of a fully thought out system to it. There's feedback to everything you do. And I've never fed anyone in the camp. I go to camp occasionally. Someone will comment that I smell. So I have a bath, mostly because I'm worried about the odor that I'm kind of giving the animals as I'm trying to hunt them, and then go back out again.
Huh. Yeah, before every time I left on a mission, I'd make sure to come back with an animal as a gift to the cook.
Oh,
that's my little routine.
Oh, that's so cute.
Well, it's not that cute. I mean, I did kill a thing. Yeah, I did one legendary hunt.
Right.
I can't remember of what beast it was, and I was just like, it seems weird that I should be rewarded for killing the most noble animal. The most successful animal that's lived such a long time that it's become legend. I should end that legend. I don't know. It didn't sit right with me. I'm not a natural predator.
Yeah, I mean, yes, of course, and I'm definitely I took a pot shot at a fox before, so to give a quick précis to it, so there are animals running around you all the time when you're playing, and by clicking in both sticks, if you're playing on a pad, you'll go into sort of like bullet timey mode, but you also get to see like detective-y mode, and you get to see the scent trails of the animals around you. If you've seen an animal or identified an animal before of one of those trails, it'll tell you what the trail is of, and then you can press R1 to track it, and that way when you exit detective mode, you can then see kind of like a yellowish sort of trail going off into the distance, but it pulses gently, so it's hard to see amongst undergrowth and things, so you still feel quite sort of skillful as you try to follow it. And there's a time limit to how long it maintains as well, so you've got to keep on top of it. And all the time the animal will be moving along as well, so you've got to kind of pick up the pace. If you haven't seen it before, you've got to like observe an animal beforehand, whether through your binoculars if it's far away, or if you can creep close enough to see it through your naked eye. And you've got to sort of look at it for a while and hold down the button and keep it in the middle of your view in order to see what it is, and then it gets added to your compendium. And each of these creatures, and there are 180 different species across the game, something like that. It's just incredible amount of stuff, and they all, they all behave differently. They all have their own they have their own animations as you skin them. They have like interior bodies underneath the skull, underneath the skin. You can see, he strips off the fur, and you see kind of their little sort of naked, sort of muscular kind of bodies underneath, which is tragic.
Must have been either really traumatic for the artist who was tasked with making all those things, or they were a big fan of barbecue by the end.
Yeah. And then also, there's also the fact that like a lot of the animals, especially the large ones, they had to animate specifically per species the process of skinning them. Obviously, it doesn't do every step, but like you definitely skin an alligator very differently to an elk.
I think I'd like to know how. I mean, obviously they are somewhat accelerated, these things, but I mean, like, I don't think you can basically just tug a rabbit and they come inside out.
Honestly, no. That is how you skin a rabbit. As a rabbit owner, I can tell you that's true. An ex-rabbit owner. But yeah, it is. I've just been finding it incredibly bucolic. Oh yeah, that's right. I was talking about the fox. Yeah, I took a pot shot of a fox, which I hadn't. So the animals you see in the field, they will have a different sort of quality rating. It's a bit like Uber rating, I suppose, but for animals. And they are poor, good, or perfect.
Does the animal get to rate you as well?
I'd hope so. I'd be very low. Stinky, hairy man.
And killed me.
And I took it, this fox appeared, and I didn't know whether it was perfect or not because I didn't have time, because he was about to just run over the brow of a hill. So I took a shot of it with my gun. Each animal requires a different gun to get a clean kill. And a clean kill, if you hit the right part of the animal, will kill it immediately, like straight off. So I used my varmint rifle, which is for most small mammals, and it took 5 shots, and I was feeling awful. And it's like, oh no. And I just took shot after shot after shot of it. And that was poor pelt by the time I got to it.
Are there any animals that you refuse to hunt out of a sense of their own, preserving their dignity as a beast?
Absolutely not. If they're perfect, they're mine. Because it could make for a nice piece of clothing.
I can't kill cats. I hate killing dogs in games. But the wild cats, I can't.
I haven't thought about that. I thought I probably would be able to kill a big cat because they've attacked me enough that I just fuck them. Dogs,
I run away from them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
just flee them, leave them to their wild ways in the mountains.
It's definitely, but I've really enjoyed exploring the world, not as a way of just sort of getting from A to B, just being there and sort of observing the animals. And actually, like, the main thing I want to do is fill out the compendium. So anything new I'm kind of getting quite excited about. And you just see, like, layers and layers of extra stuff going on. The way that you'll just come across dynamically placed a carcass of just a naturally dead deer, and there are crows that flutter down to it, and you come nearby and they all fly away. You go back away again and they've come back down to the carcass again. I was by a lake, and a bald eagle came swooping down from the mountain, down, splooshed into the water and back up, and I managed to look at it through the binoculars, and it had taken like a water snake and was just flying off with it. Like, holy fuck.
Cool.
That game. It's just it's a beyond thing, you know, the thing that they've made is just so insanely detailed and multifaceted, and, you know, and for all this stuff is kind of flawed and weird and all that kind of thing, but I don't know, right now it's giving the opportunity to sort of subsume myself in a way that I'm really loving.
It's very restive.
Yeah.
We are enjoying a brief pause now while we wait for Tom Senior to return, because there's a loud boiler man in his room, in his words, making sure he won't explode. Oh, he back?
He's back.
I'm back, but the boiler man might be back very soon. But no, it's both annoying and reassuring at the same time that this is happening, because I don't want to explode. That would be really sad.
Did you give him 2 meter distance?
No, he just sort of just wandered in, and then he was just in the room with me, and it was just quite strange and not ideal.
Podcasting, are we? Did he say that?
He did, yeah. He wouldn't
Cast, yeah. Good platform.
Oh, I love them games I do. Call of Duty, classic.
Oh, shit.
But yeah, things are fine. But I might not be able to deliver any instant hot takes for the next 5 minutes while this man, who is still yelling in my hallway, does whatever he has to do.
Just whatever needs to happen to make sure that gas isn't the thing that gets you.
I'll keep you guys updated.
Cool.
Talking of gas, have you been having a gas in Bannerlord?
Thanks for that segue.
No problem.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord came out all of a sudden. I think they'd announced that it was going to come out in early access. This is a game that has been in development now for 7 years, I think. And so much so that I hosted the developers on like the first PC Gamer weekend live stream in a completely different part of my life, and that must have been 5 or 6 years ago now. So it's strange that it exists. So this was the sequel to Mountain Blade, which is actually, I think, probably the first game I ever backed in any kind of early access. I must have bought that game in 2009. Maybe that's too early, but it's a long time ago when it was still just a sort of indie medieval life warfare sim. And this is obviously super hotly anticipated, and it is released in a relatively complete. It's rough around the edges, but it feels pretty far along as these games go. I've played about 4 or 5 hours of it now, which is sufficient to... Not really sufficient to judge it, because of the kind of game it is, and I'll explain that momentarily. But it is sufficient to have fallen into some very, very familiar patterns. And I think the thing that is most immediately surprising to me about it is how similar to its predecessor it is. I think, given the success of Mountain Blade, and given the time that has been spent on this, it's not that I was expecting a huge departure necessarily, but I was expecting like a degree of polish, maybe, or like, evolution, whereas it feels very much like a kind of, maybe there are things later on that are more genuinely new, but it feels like a evolution of that game, the first game's first expansion, Mountain Blade Warband, in a new engine, but fundamentally the same game and with lots of the same jank, like exactly the same jank, and that kind of surprised me a little bit. I'm enjoying it, but it's more of a kind of... I was excited to sort of jump straight into it, and it's more of a guarded response, I think, than I was expecting. So if you're not aware, Mountain Blade is a game... it's a sort of medieval simulator where you build up a little warband of your own, which can eventually expand to become a kind of a fiefdom as you kind of make your way in a simulated medieval world where, a bit like something like Elite, every different, every settlement, army you encounter, character you encounter are all independent simulated agents going about their own business. They belong to empires and have their own, hierarchies and allegiances, and those things have tied to political and economic systems in almost like a grand strategy sense that is going on around you at all times. So if you see some peasants going from one village to another to a nearby town to sell something, that is likely how the supply chain actually works. And if you interrupt that, it will have a knock-on effect, and so on and so on. And the fantasy is that you sort of insert yourself into this initially in a very lowly position and eventually have your own lands and castles and things, and you're leading your troops in battle. And in battle, you're doing the first or third person kind of fairly granular melee action. Tom Senior, welcome back.
Hello.
You've banished the gas man.
He's gone.
We're talking about Mount Blade Bannerlord. Or I am. And so basically, there's a few things about it. Like, so, its combat system is kind of there to work for, like, one-on-one sword fights and things, but also for potentially mass battles between, like, dozens or hundreds of participants. And in that regard, I think one thing I immediately realized, because I've always loved sword fighting systems, as I've said many, many times, and I've always liked Mount & Blade because it was one of the games that started to really engage with that and give you a way of playing in that way. But in the meantime, I feel like I've been totally spoiled by Mordhau specifically, which has such a great feeling, granular medieval sword fighting system, albeit one designed for much smaller numbers of people, that it feels like there's no way that this will ever feel as satisfying. I was talking about Mordhau before, there's loads of great things about it, but the main one is like the feeling of hitting someone with a sword, the sense, it's a great way of giving you a real physical sense of where a blade is in space and how they interact with each other is kind of absent. And the other thing that has surprised me, so the beginning of a Mount & Blade campaign is always kind of similar in that you get your initial warband and you protect it quite tightly and you try and build up till you kind of become a bit like the start of a grand strategy game, actually, until you're powerful enough to move about the world and have a bit more freedom of what you engage. The beginning of a Mount & Blade campaign is traditionally chasing around bands of hillmen and bandits that are smaller than you, beating them up for XP and money. And the way you do this principally is by abusing their AI, honestly. And I think that's one of its downsides, and that's the thing that's the thing I'm most surprised to see be exactly the same.
Yeah, I was surprised when I saw some live streams of it.
So in battle you have some tactical control of your own people. You can tell them where to go, where to stand, to form shield walls and stuff, and that feels pretty cool. There is basically, but that's not what you're up against. You're not up against an opponent that's making decisions like that. What you're up against, in most cases, is an enemy force that knows where you are on the map. There's no hiding, there's nothing like that. They know exactly where you are. And they will run at you. They will run at the nearest enemy thing in a straight line and fight it. That's what they do. They just will go for the nearest enemy thing in a straight line. And at the start of the game, you have a horse, so you can ride around, a mount, if you will, and you can ride around, do things, and you're usually leading a little warband of men on foot. And the way you shore up your own, win without taking any casualties is tell your men to stand still, ride out ahead of them, ride around your opponent, and sort of, the best way I can describe it is kind of whisk them. It's quite risky to put yourself in combat with them. Like you can ride past and swing your sword down. It'll helpfully tell you what the relative meters per second speed of your sword versus their cranium was. It's helpful to have some ranged weapons. I've now got some javelins that I can throw at people, and you harry them basically. But they will switch from running towards your block of troops to you, and they will chase you around, they will turn around, they'll chase you around for a bit, and if you go far enough away, they'll get bored. And imagine, it's almost like, the best way to describe it is like the air is more like stellar bodies colliding. Like, for a time, you have greater gravity than the pull of your men standing on a nearby hill, so you can split a group of enemies so that half of them are now chasing you and half of them are still running towards your opponent. And you can sort of inch back to pick up a few more. And it's almost a game at that point about trying to create a scenario where a few of the main enemies from the group forget about you and run towards your men to get munched in the meat grinder, while you continue to harry and tease apart the main group. None of this has any, and you consistently level up your tactic skill by doing this, but none of it has anything to do with like an actual medieval battle or skirmish. It's totally gamey, and you could role play it and refuse to play that way and stand in the shield wall with your men and your shield up, and it is quite immersive to play that way, but it also is ruthlessly punishing, because you'll get injured and that will take ages to heal. You might even get knocked out or captured, at which point you are then a captive in the world. You're being traded around or waiting for a chance to escape. And so it's a strange thing so far. Like, I'm quite enjoying it because I quite enjoyed the originals, but I think from a sequel, I wasn't expecting that same real, like, bizarre lack of intelligence on the behalf of the people you're fighting. Like, it does feel like, you can, even if you're confident that you can win a battle, you can just tell your men to charge, and they will also know psychically where the enemy is and just follow them. And then wait till the two lines of men clash together and just rely on the maths to kind of to turn it in your favour.
Weird.
Yeah, it is.
See,
weird.
I thought that the previous games in this series they aspired to being more simulatory and serious, and were held back only by technology at the time and their wanton jankiness. Whereas I would have thought that this game would have continued kind of travelling in that same direction towards being simulation. But it sounds like it's actually veered off into something more arcadey.
No, it sounds like, it sounds very and looks very much like the game that I played, years ago. Like, it's very similar, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a deep sim. Like, it is. So what I would say is, it's not arcadey in the slightest. It's deeply simulatory. Like, every projectile's velocity is measured. You're constantly seeing a feed of events in the world as castles change hands due to political machinations or battles you're not seeing. Like, there's a huge amount invested in the simulation of the world. The thing that has surprised me, and maybe this gets fixed over the course of early access, but I don't have a huge amount of faith in that because it wasn't really fixed for the original games, is that and this is an interesting question, or existential question for a game like this. It has this really impressive simulation of a medieval world. But the basic unit of that is a skirmish between two war bands, right? That is the event of the game. And it doesn't have AI for that. And that really surprised me because, once upon a time it did feel that Martin Blade was taking a lot on for an indie game to also be this open world thing, this simulation, this sort of granular medieval combat sim. AI may be the thing you sacrifice there. But for it to be missing at this level, I find genuinely surprising. And similarly, like, it's, there's a lot of, generated characters and stock scenarios that occur as you move around, stock conversations and things like that. But there are ways of presenting those and spicing those things up that are absent. Like, it feels like it's maybe not fully localized yet for English, or if it is that no real attention has been paid to the craft of the writing in the game at all. There is a story, critical path for you to follow, but and a lot of background. It's a fictionalized Europe, really.
It's a Turkish studio, right?
It is, yeah. And that stuff is, it's not necessarily a priority in a game like this. It's a huge sim, but again, it's one of those things that I felt like, I think after 7 years of development, I was expecting a bit less of that sort of really sort of rough around the edges sort of experimentalness. Like, I don't know why I had that impression, but it felt like, given the amount of attention and the amount of hype, that it would be more of a sort of polished retake on the same idea rather than such a throwback.
It's like it's. And I'd love to talk to him about it because I can see. I mean, certainly the warband, the combat side of it being like a big design challenge, because you need to let the player feel like they can have a hack and a slash and play a pivotal role, while you also need them to feel vulnerable, you also want it to be like very strategic, and for all of your little AI bandmates to have a very specific role in the battle. But on the other hand, because you're playing live, you can't have granular strategic control over them. So you don't want to be in situations where, oh, you're on the other side of the map and everyone's dead now, which kind of happens, but it happens because of the mad melee, as opposed to, well, I set up this careful play and, like Total War style, and it all went to shit, but I couldn't control it because I was also wanting to hack and slash. Maybe the problem was that once upon a time in the mid-2000s, someone had this idea to do this game, and then it kind of couldn't really solve it at the time. And I'm wondering whether this game is like a massive hit already, and the user reviews on Steam are really good. Is it part of this game that it's the janky hack and slashy battle, that they can't actually escape it, even if they can solve these seemingly
I'm really interested
hard
in
problems?
I think there's a few sides to it. One is that it might genuinely get better. There might be a degree to which this really dodgy AI is specific to bandits and hillmen. That when you start to encounter, because I've had some cool moments. I've ended up intercepting a band of looters that were fleeing a much bigger army, and because I had caught them, that allowed this other army to catch up, and that gave me a kind of glimpse at riding into battle alongside a massive column of cavalry that were also there, and that was cool. I didn't see them do anything other than charge in a straight line, but maybe the situation didn't call for anything else. Maybe when you progress and you're fighting more organized forces, they display that, and that could well be the case, and I definitely want to leave the door open for that. My only kind of thought is it's a weird first impression, and for it to be as rough as it is, and I think the other side of it is those games are also beloved, I think, because of the modding that they supported in the other lives they had, right? Like whether it's the Lord of the Rings mods or the Game of Thrones mods, and the things that they're really optimal for. And I'm just sort of curious to know to what extent the vanilla game will kind of satisfy people beyond a certain point. I appreciate this sounds super negative, and I kind of almost didn't intend to, because I am enjoying it. But I did have a friend ask me the other day if I'd recommend it, and I honestly don't know if I would, because it's such it was an acquired taste before, and I think in doing a sequel, in redoing the engine, in all of that stuff, there was an opportunity to build on the core fantasy of it. And I think something that's really key to the appeal of these games, like a lot of sort of life sim open world things like Elite, is they're just as much about what they allow your imagination to do as what you actually do in them. And Mount & Blade has always supported that, and Mount & Blade is beloved because of that. It's beloved because, despite the fact that it's been janky as hell for a long time, the people look really weird, and they look really weird in this one as well. That you invest because it gives you all this space to imagine yourself as part of this fantasy world, and to live out a particular fantasy in the game, and that's why people get very emotionally attached to them, and why they attract the following that they do. With that in mind, I think it's possible. I find it's interesting 10 years later to be playing the same game and contending with the same barriers to my immersion. And so I'll be interested to see how the reception pans out as well. And obviously it's early access, and that should be the huge caveat around all of this. These things could very easily change.
You can play as a baby.
You can play as a baby. Apparently. It's got. I don't know if you there are kids running around the towns now, which I don't think were in previous ones. The kids, so the one thing it does, which is great, one thing I like a lot is, it does allow you to, play as a female character, and so I've made a giant swordswoman. I didn't realize how massive she was until I got into the game, and I just tower over everybody, which is great. But the original game had this, personality test, kind of personal history, character creation system, where it's like, what were you like when you were a baby? What were you like when you were a teenager? And everyone is really big. Like, people have big heads and big, burly, stocky bodies, men and women. and they wear big clothes. And the effect of this is that everyone in the game in normal dress looks a bit like Baby Yoda. Like at the best of times. And then for the kids, as far as I can tell, they just make the bodies smaller and the heads bigger.
Walloping babies.
And so, and they do this, like, they kind of, once you've created your character, they, like, proc-gen your parents, and then you, as a child, they derive you as a child from the adult version, and then as a teen and a young adult from the adult version you've created. And so you're treated to, like, this kind of gurning, mutant baby, like, Funko Pop version of the character you just made, while you decide, like, your early childhood was spent training with the Hearthguard, or something like that. The other thing that I like it does is when you're about to load into a battle, on the kind of your army versus their army screen, your character pulls a face based on how with you or against you the odds appear to be. And they're all really funny. Like if you look like you're about to die because there's like 400 bandits coming over the hill, you do this face like, oh man, those were my chips. And if you're definitely going to kill all these people because there's 15 of you and 4 of them, you're like gurning sideways into the camera like you're photobombing someone. Like it's really good. I don't know why they've done that.
Shall we do some questions from questions?
Yes.
Well, actually, no, we shouldn't.
Oh.
What?
Because we have 2 announcements to make. The first is that I've just seen on our Twitter account that listener Elliot Metzen has pointed us in the direction of Haggard Hawks, which is apparently an etymology podcast, which states that a gribble is a gnarled wooden walking stick.
Oh.
So there you go.
That doesn't describe my Gene Stealer cults at all.
No. And the other announcement is related to the question we had last week about a difficulty getting access to the podcasts. We put out a call to see if anybody else had similar difficulties, and other people have. It seems, thanks to the investigative work of listener Spad, that it relates to people trying to use old RSS readers or iTunes, either an old version of iTunes on a new device or an old version of iTunes on an old iPod or similar iDevice which has not been updated to the new version of iTunes, which can access the sites using more recent security protocols. So HTTPS is how our host now serves MP3s, and older versions of iTunes cannot seemingly access MP3s via that. Not quite sure what to do about this. We are looking to change hosting at some point, but there's no guarantee that any future form of hosting that we would use an older security standard, because that's insecure. So I don't know what the solution is. If you can update your RSS reader, then do so. If you can't, you're kind of a bit boned. But you can probably access the MP3s direct.
Yeah, you can download the MP3s directly from the site. So
yeah.
And we're on YouTube as well.
And we're on YouTube as well, yes.
Yeah. Thanks for looking into that, Marsh.
Oh, and Spotify. You can get us on Spotify.
Yeah, we are on Spotify now as well.
Oh, yeah.
I forgot I'd done that.
Anyway, shall we do some questions?
Yes, let's. The first one is a long old one, but it's worth getting the necessary context for the question. This is from Toivo, who writes, Dear Great End Growbarn, I've been enjoying your podcast for half a year. Now I have sent you a question. In this context, I want to talk to you about a game called The Longing that I just finished. The Longing is a game where you play as a lonely little shade tasked with waking the slumbering king of an underground kingdom who will regain his might in 400 days. This is your only task. Wait 400 days from when you booted up the game in real time, ticking down even when the game is closed, and then wake the king. It has several different endings. You can explore the underground kingdom and take up hobbies, but the long wait is what it boils down to. However, the game is not a mere gimmick or a deconstructionist parody of clicker games, as one might presume from the premise and from one of the official trailers for the game being literally 4 hours long. It's a beautifully crafted experience with serious philosophical implications as deep as the crust of the earth. The go on to explain that it's possible to do things in the game to to speed up the progress of time, essentially to increase the value of a given second. You can spruce up your room, and the cozier it gets, the faster time flies in there. And after ransacking the kingdom and hauling half of it back, I had gotten the timer up to 18 seconds per second. This allowed me to finish the game far faster than in 13 months, and much quicker than what I imagined it to be when I first heard of the game. But the 400-day hook was too powerful for many people, as it turns out. Many of them do not want to hasten the game, even going so far as to petition the developers to keep the timer at a constant 1 second per second so that the game could last over a year as advertised. Which brings me to my question. In one of the last episodes, there was talk of playing games without the anxiety of completionism, talk of playing for yourself rather than a virtual trophy, to have fun without tedious challenges or side quests for just enough time. Are there any games where you deliberately want to take the long road, act out a lengthy scenario, toil hard in the grind fields and make things extra difficult for yourself, all for that extra special personal sense of accomplishment, even if you get no Steam achievement, no pat on the back, and no peer recognition? Perhaps the games where you take solitary pride in the number of quality of the steps you take, or one with a world that is simply enchanting to spend time in. Best wishes, Toivo.
Yeah, this reminds me of playing Vesper 5. Yeah, Vesper 5, which is a game made by my brain's gone. I'm going to look it up while I'm talking. But in it, you get to make one move per day, and you can't do any more than that. And you're moving on a 2D tiles, and you can make one move and you make a decision of which way you're going to go. And a week into that decision, you might think, "Oh, wish I'd gone that way," but you've kind of made it, and it's sort of every tiny little extra reveal has extra meaning and things. And it's the kind of the core appeal for me is obviously Animal Crossing as well, like where day is a day, and just watching that slow passage of time is cool. And obviously these games do reward you for playing in this way, so it doesn't totally hold true to what the right.
I think it does, because I think the Animal Crossing debate is so much about time traveling and changing a system clock to get things faster, and horse in that race. Personally, necessarily, I understand that some people just effectively cheat their way to the end of the game, so they have the maximum amount of stuff so that they can do what they actually want to do, which is design clothes, and that makes perfect sense. So to that extent, I guess I am choosing to not do that, and because I enjoy the fact that the game only asks a certain amount of me every day, and it just sort of rolls on, steadily with a few things for me to do, and then I can just sort of enjoy spending time in it or not. Yeah,
definitely. Oh, Vesper 5 is made by Michael Brogue. Of course it is.
Of course it is.
Also, I think the mobile games have been experimenting with time gating, aggressively time gating people for a long time now, and actually trying to leverage that to get money out of people. So I think it's kind of, I'd much prefer the Animal Crossing thing where people are changing their system settings to try and access different time zones than the developer actually sort of asking them to pay to speed that stuff up,
right?
Because that's quite a manipulative way of designing a game.
Yeah, for sure. Because also, they're offering you the fruit, and you have to pay for it. So which actually you're paying for it if you're kind of, because Animal Crossing becomes a little bit meaningless. The things you see in Animal Crossing when you get to choose to see them, it's it's the big game thing. Like if you've got a game that's full of stuff that you can access at any point, the individual value of anything is much lower than when you have this tiny proportion of things you can see at any point, and that you don't have any control over.
Yeah, I suppose. Sorry, go on, Tom.
Oh yeah, so there's so much value, I think, particularly with Animal Crossing, which is a good example of this sort of game. There's just a huge social aspect to it, in terms of having your place and inviting other people over to your place and sharing fruit and planting in each other's gardens and taking advantage of each other's settlements. And that feels like actually such a worthwhile way of using this sort of time-gated game, instead of it just being about progress. Of course, there are always going to be players who are going to chase that progress, and they're going to chase the kind of, they want to max everything out and get as much money as possible. And there are people in PC Gamers Slack chat who are trying to game the tarantula hunting because there's a particular vendor who turns up, and that vendor buys tarantulas for 1.5 times the price that the raccoons will buy from you. So Graham on PC Gamer, our video producer, he posted a screenshot in the Slack earlier that was just a beach that was entirely full of boxes of tarantulas, because he was just waiting for that vendor to come so that he could sell, and he reckons he's going to make 1.5 mil off of that. So you can't stop the power gamers. You just can't stop them. But what I really like about Animal Crossing particularly is that it's there for the power gamers if they want to do that. But it's not actually designed for them. It's designed for people who just want to tune in day in and day out and sort of have a gardening experience, and that's what I love about the game.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is it's ultimately about in whose interest is the time gating, basically. And Animal Crossing is built around the notion that it is in your interest, the time gating. It's about furnishing a gentle experience over time. And if you don't want that, you have the option to circumvent it, but whereas in a mobile game or a free-to-play game, that time gating is not in your interest. It's about the developer showing up and asking to be paid, which is not unreasonable, but it's also a very, very different proposition, I think. I
think that that monetization really undermines the spirit of the game. That's quite a woolly thing to say, I think, but I think there's a sort of integrity to Animal Crossing that I didn't get from the mobile version, for example.
Yeah.
That actually makes it feel much more like a worthwhile pursuit, and that's purely down to the monetization and the kind of the gating in order to try and spend money, which to me just cheapens the experience and the charm of the game. I think
I was thinking about this. I appreciate talking about Animal Crossing a lot, but I'm probably going to do some more talking about Animal Crossing in the future as well. But it occurred to me how important it is that Animal Crossing feels like it's there, partly its online systems are all built this way, its economies are built this way, it's what could be addictive loops are built this way to make it kind of a safe thing for kids to play. Like, it has all, there are so many kind of implicit, not in dangers, but, risks associated with any kind of acquisitive gameplay or farming or fishing or these kind of addictive loops. And it feels very robustly made to make sure this is something that you could let a kid play and they may lose hours and hours to it, but it's hopefully not abusive of their investment or their time. And it strikes me as it's absolutely essential that the game be so robustly made for children in order to best serve its actual target audience, depressed millennials.
And Generation X's.
True. True, yeah. Yeah, any other slow burn games? 'Cause, I suppose that's how you're playing Red Dead, right? It's almost the theme of this whole podcast.
Yeah.
I think Red Dead, I've said on the podcast before, is probably the first game which has truly incentivized me not to fast travel, in which I've genuinely enjoyed the journeys between places more than the actual events that occur there. Which is, I think that is a new thing for me. Usually I even in games which are beautiful like Skyrim, I pretty quickly end up fast traveling. But not in Red Dead. I think it's just hit some sort of, particular watermark for bucolia, which means that I am suckered in.
I think No Man's Sky is actually an interesting case to consider here, because I think a lot of people were very frustrated with the gating mechanisms in that game in terms of how it constrained you from actually exploring as much as the great sell of that game is that you can just go from system to system and see all these extraordinary, beautiful procedurally generated worlds. But the reality of the game in its standard mode is that you have to actually spend loads of time crafting and zapping things and building things in a clear time gating way. And that's unfulfilling in that game in a way that I don't mind that at all in Animal Crossing, and that's kind of an interesting difference. I'm not sure quite why I accept it in Animal Crossing and can't accept it in No Man's Sky.
I think, from a design point of view, I think one really key thing is Animal Crossing doesn't have anything that you have to keep doing in order to simply keep the clock, to keep the lights on. And it's a really crucial difference.
That's a
like,
good point.
it's not a survival game, so it doesn't have, like, you're not going to starve to death, you're not going to run out of power or fuel. Whereas No Man's Sky is constantly making you top up your various meters in order to be able to just keep exploring or something like that.
I think it's also like, it's always promising there's something else, there's something else, there's something else. And as soon as it's like that thing where you have the everlasting kind of, you get a great big box of Quality Street and you just sort of gorge on it. But if you have just a couple of them, they taste sweeter and you're not sated. But like, you just have a couple and you think, I think it's the fact that you could be going to that planet and the next one and the next one. And like anything that stands in your way becomes a frustration, as opposed to Animal Crossing, where there is a hard limit on what you can see, and that's quite a sharp, hard minute.
Yeah,
Sharp and hard.
Like a cheese. Anything else on this, or should we move on to the next one?
Yeah, let's go.
Cool. This is exactly the sort of thing I'd normally achieve by looking around a room. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
We should click the button saying "Raise your hand."
Yeah.
Raise your hand to say no. I've got nothing to say.
Darren writes, "Hello, dear Create and Crowbar. I was catching up with your pods, and a conversation from a few months ago regarding the struggles of mid-tier games struck me. I think I love mid-tier games. Games in that awkward $20 to $40 price range. Games passed over as decent examples of existing genres, but with aesthetics or narratives different enough to grab me. Games with creative or distinct systems that, for reasons I can't grok, fly under radars. My library is full of them. I recently finished playing Masters of Anima. I've been deriving a great deal of joy from Dwaros in these troubled times, and Iron Danger is next on my list as one of my most anticipated games of the year. I love these games. Yet you can imagine that once I leave the dedicated Discord servers or forums for these games, I almost never hear about them, save the occasional launch announcement, as developers try their hardest to be heard. I feel like I'm living in a parallel universe to the wider gaming community, in a different universe of games. It's lonely here in the weird middle. Why is it so lonely? Stay safe, sane, sober, and may your hand sanitizer never run out. Darren." I haven't heard of any of those games.
I haven't heard anything. Thank God you said.
We're supposed to know this stuff, guys. But I too don't know any of those games.
But you're the newsman.
I know, right? I'm the guiltiest of all.
I think it's a strange one, isn't it? Because obviously if games are attracting enough of an audience for the developers to keep making them and keep the lights on, then that's fine. Like maybe we've passed beyond an era where it's possible for everybody to be aware of everything that's happening in video games because the industry was so small. Maybe that's one consequence of there being a middle. I don't know. Is it? Help me out.
I mean, does it have a shape that has a middle anymore? Like, because it just sort of seems like I used to know what a middle game was. Like, middle games were like Soldier, what, I don't know.
THQ would be published.
Yeah, THQ games, exactly. But now, like, they take so many forms, many of which we have no idea of because we've never heard of them.
I love a good middle game.
I know you do. Yeah, this is the thing. You're the spokesperson for 6 out of 10. So
I'm a big fan of them, and I do empathise at that point that you feel like you're in a different fucking paradigm from everyone else. When obviously, like a lot of the time, you're covering the big new releases, the big budget games, but some kind of like small thing where I can't remember that Quern, yes, like Quern, which I've talked about on the podcast before, which is a kind of Myst-like adventure game that is very much one of these middle games that will just get lost, and they rarely get covered unless I happen to write about them and be like, this 6 out of 10 is a fun 6 out of 10 as opposed to other games. Those feel like I find that quite encouraging, that people are just kind of making their little kind of hobbyist projects almost, and catering to quite niche audiences with these games. So like Myst isn't a genre, that type of adventure game isn't like a widely popular genre, but there are so many games that have tried to fill that gap, including Abduction, which is obviously made by the people who actually made Myst. I think that's the space that those middle games we talk about occupy, where they're kind of just filling up. It's not just purely nostalgic, because that's quite reductive, but I think it's just they're keeping genres going almost, and just keeping those ideas alive.
When's the cover shooter? I'm looking forward to the middle game cover shooter to keep that alive.
Yeah, like a modern sort of. I know Gears of War is still going, but a version of that is kind of a knockoff. I received a tweet today from a studio who are making a game that looks a lot like Dead Space. And by a lot like Dead Space, I mean it is. It is Dead Space. And I wrote about it like a year or two ago, and I said this game's Isaac equivalent looks like he needs to be defrosted in a microwave. And they tweeted me today to say, we've defrosted him.
Yeah.
they've changed the art for the character, and I know I'm sure I'm not solely responsible for that, but I don't know. That is a great example of a middle game filling a gap that, like Dead Space was great. I really enjoyed Dead Space. It just went off the rails with 3 when it tried to be a co-op thing.
It is a middle core studio who interacts with the journalists in that way as well. That's like hats off to that as well.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, man, maybe that's the best way to think about. Like, I quite like the idea of it, because if when we're talking about games being lost, it's really about them vanishing from the discourse. And there's only so much space to talk about things, and people only want to talk about Animal Crossing now anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, I quite like the idea of the middle as being a place where genres that have fallen out of favour can be picked up, and maybe even can be defined by the fact that as access to technology to make more sophisticated games becomes more widespread, it is possible, like maybe this is the other side of it, it is now possible for smaller studios or indie studios to some extent both try and compete with genres that would be considered AAA a couple of years ago, but also in that regard to bite off slightly more than they can chew. Like it is possible for a smaller studio to set itself the task of making a Call of Duty style game, and therefore it is never going to compete marketing wise or budget wise with Call of Duty, and therefore it's likely to get lost. But there is still merit in that potentially. Like I would love, I think there have been and there are attempts to make Mass Effect style games in this way without access, without the resources invested in that kind of thing. And that's another genre. The BioWare RPG is actually probably rapidly becoming a genre that should probably be swept up by indies newly empowered by better engines and things.
I think that almost all Warhammer games fall into this category.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah,
Mechanicus was a very, very middle game, but great.
Yeah.
Beautifully done.
Shout
That
out to all
reminds
the
me,
middle games out
actually,
there.
like there is a game that is apparently very, very good, which I kind of couldn't imagine it, but it's a big budget, and yet it really should be middle core, which is the Gears of War. So cover shooter tactics game. Tactics game is the classic
really
middle
good.
core. Yeah, like I've read several very, very praising things. It looks awesome. You get 3 goes.
Did you just say middle core?
Yeah.
Okay. Apparently Gears Tactics is supposed to be legit.
Yeah,
which
I've heard that. I'm happy for Splash Damage particularly, who are working on that.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, is it Splash Damage?
I think it's both Splash Damage and the Coalition, but I
Okay, cool.
believe Splash Damage has done a lot of it. That's super podcast voice.
Yeah.
Don't know. But yeah, I just Googled it and they are listed as the developers. So
Middle core.
That's
middle
cool.
core, yeah.
I do like slightly. It's probably slightly lower budget than middle core even, but as you said, like Myst clones are a thing, but also just slightly lower bar than that. That's sort of more like you're always on an alien planet powering up strange alien structures with light beams. That seems to be the thing. You're possibly in a coma at the same time. But there's lots and lots of them on Steam because just it's a reasonably approachable thing to do with Unity, I think, to make a first person, because you have like first person mobility baked into that, and then some light puzzle solving which doesn't require much more complex geometry than, you know, abstract polygonal monoliths. And there's quite a few of them, and they're all quite nice. It's just it turns out that you can produce something that's quite aesthetically pleasing to move around in, and you know, restive in the same way that wandering through Bucolia is restive.
Our final question comes from Ryan, who writes, "Dear Crate, how do you feel about Half-Life Alyx not including me? Sincerely, Crowbar."
I think none of us have played it, right?
No. In fact, we may have to seek external aid in the future in order to have opinions about Half-Life Alyx.
Yeah.
We can go to Tom's house.
Did he leave his? Did he leave his Vive here?
I don't think it's very secure to say that he did, but he may have. But that's probably not true.
So what we're going to say is that we're going to burgle Tom Francis's house in order to play
Burgle,
Half-Life Alyx.
borrow. I mean,
We could ask him. we have that power.
I think it's like the system requirements are quite high for that game, and in order, I would almost be tempted to buy an Index headset or something. But I would actually have to upgrade my entire PC to actually run it, and that's the barrier to me.
I keep being tempted. I keep being tempted by a VR thing, but I think that might just be the stir crazy talking.
Well, that's why I bought a PSVR, because fucking lockdown.
Exactly.
It's nice to put a thing on your head that takes you to other places.
Like James Cameron's Avatar. Yeah.
Yeah, and Blood and Truth, yeah.
Yeah. I'm surprised it doesn't have a crowbar in it, if true.
So apparently
Surprising
that was apparently due to testing. It was people who had the crowbar thought they were Gordon Freeman and not Alex. So Valve decided to take it out. There was a crowbar in it apparently initially.
Man, imagine if the totality of your character can be summed up in like half a meter of metal.
I hold this.
That's yeah, exactly.
Also, like a crowbar is obviously such a good fit for Half-Life Alyx, based on what I've seen of the game, where there are loads of kind of bits of wood that you have to like remove bit by bit. Yeah, give me a crowbar to smash that.
Is there like a similarly smashy thing in there? Because maybe they wanted to also limit the smashiness or smashosity.
Why would you want to limit the smashosity?
Wow.
I think it would feel weird to play a Half-Life game where you can't wave the crowbar insanely quickly. Because you know the thing, like if you hold down the mouse button, it's just like bing, 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 bing with the crowbar. Like that's what that feels. And that's the other half of Gordon Freeman's personality. It's not just man who owns this.
Speed of use.
Speed of use. Yes,
He's a very quick pulverizer.
he is. He's just particularly for a research scientist.
He'd make a great chef.
Would make a great chef. Gordon Freeman prepares onions. So you that's how I feel about that. Cool.
It is cool. Everything's cool.
Is it?
Yeah.
It kind of isn't at the moment, Alex.
Well, let's look on the bright side, Tom. You survived this podcast.
Yeah, so what happened was I survived being blown up by gas this evening, and then loads of blood fell out of me, and I had to stop that from happening. And it just seems like there's danger everywhere in my own flat.
I just feel like, because
I can't even leave.
I think you explained that you had a nosebleed on the break, so we might want to just put that note in there just in case someone started like hemorrhaging blood.
Yeah, sorry. Everything's fine.
Oh, good. Remote pods. What? Yeah.
It's so strange. It's strange doing this remotely. I miss your smells.
Oh yeah, it's going to be strange when we're all back in the same room and like don't know how to adjust back in the air. I don't know.
Yeah.
Trying to have a normal sounding conversation. So this piece of software you're using has this button you can press to raise your hand, and if you do this, quote unquote, raise your hand, as in indicate silently that you'd wish to speak. If you do this, it permanently changes your avatar to just the word "hey," and covers up the thing that moves when you speak. And I find, and so
it doesn't go. Do you have the power to get rid of the hey?
I don't want to click anything. Because if I click something, it might stop recording.
Bingo Clang's gone normal.
Not for me, he hasn't.
Oh, isn't it?
Bingo Clang's gone normal.
Look, this is...
That's a perfectly sensible thing to say. I don't know.
What a sentence.
Yeah, no. My on my screen, it's I'm uncovered. Chris is uncovered, but Ran from an Egg and Guest CT are both covered in haze.
So the raise your hand system is doesn't work.
Look, for me, everyone's still covered in hay, and I think when everyone's covered in hay is when we traditionally end the podcast.
Indeed, sneezing.
So, yeah. So it's good night from me. It's no. What do I do? What do I say? Oh yeah, if you'd like to send a question to the podcast, you'd be pleased to know I haven't even had anything to drink this evening because I'm not drinking during this period of time because I'm alone in my house. This is just sheer ennui. If you'd like to send us a question for a future episode of the podcast, you can email us the questions at crateandcrowbar.com. You can also tweet us at Crate and Crowbar. You can find our Discord community on Discord via a link on our website at crateandcrowbar.com. You can find our episodes on YouTube at youtube.com/crateandcrowbar. And thank you, as ever, to our Patreon supporters who've provided the resources necessary to pivot to this seamless new way of delivering content online. You can find out more about our Patreon at patreon.com/crateandcrowbar. Thank you very much. I've been Chris Thurston. He's been Dr. Bingo Clang.
Thanks. Yes, and if you're feeling a bit peaky, I have a large number of remedies that you can purchase at a high price, involving crystals and little coils of metal, guaranteed to work.
Someone else has been running from an egg.
I'm quite puffed out now.
And finally, a guest with my initials. It's Guest CT.
And that being Tom Senior. And thanks for noshing, everybody.
Khaki Avengers out.